The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
My good friend Vince is one of those people that every time we have a conversation, it feels like it should just keep going. There's so much there. Vince has lived a rich life in the military, in sales, and now as a coach of coaches. He's one of those people that has taken coaching to the next level. I asked Vince to come on to talk about Remembrance Day coming up. What you'll hear in this conversation is Vince's heart, his passion, and you'll hear his desire to make an impact in his world. Connection means something special to him, mostly because of the time he spent in the military, not just on a mission, but working with others, connecting with others, and really getting to know the people that had his back. In Vince's bio, he says, if we can get curious and clear about what we want, the impact we want to make, and why it matters, then regardless of challenges, obstacles, and suffering, progress can be made. It isn't about restricting how we think and feel. It's about shifting how we think and feel in a way that maintains a high performance. And that turns into acceleration and amplifies the impact we want to make in the world. No wonder Vince and I always have great conversations anytime we meet. Well, welcome everyone back to the Connector Next Door. And I have a good friend here today. Vince, you have been, I guess I knew of you before I actually knew you. You were working with a business organization, kind of giving some advice to entrepreneurs. And I just got curious about the work that you were doing. And you as a coach has just been really amazing just to watch your growth over the last couple of years. And having this conversation about connection and this unique conversation that you and I are going to have today is pretty special to me. I love being able to go here with you. Welcome here today. I'm so glad that I have the chance to chat with you about connection.
My pleasure. You got me in the feels already. So thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here with you, Lisa.
There are a lot of things that we could talk about. I think we have crossed paths in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
You are an entrepreneur. You are a coach. You are the coach's coach. You are somebody that brings people together consistently in your life. But where I want to start today is a little bit about you and your history with the military. So if we could just chat about that a little bit, like what brought you to that as part of your past, and what did that look like for you to actually make the decision to join the military?
Yeah, I love telling this story because I've been saying it for years and I was telling it all wrong. So I spent 7 years in the regular force military. We have a regular force, we have a reserve force, and so I was Reg Force for 7 years in the infantry, PPCLI, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, with a 3-year assignment with the Canadian Airborne Regiment. At the time, the Canadian Airborne Regiment was sort of our version of Special Forces. And today we have Joint Task Force 2, or JTF2 as it's typically called. And a lot of guys I trained with and deployed with are now in that unit. And these guys go head to head, play side by side, Navy SEALs, Rangers, and other special forces around the world. So they're really, really switched on humans. And I was 11 years old, brand new school for me. I'd been, for context, I've been through 10 schools by the time I graduate grade 12. And this is pretty much living in the same town. There's one school, like I grew up in Williams Lake, BC. So there's one school, Terrace, BC, that I spent 6 months in E.T. Kenny, Terrace, BC. So navigating from one new school to another, I had to use humor to navigate my way through all these new relationships. It was the only way, it was my mechanism to stay safe. And I was 11 years old, grade 6, And this was my 8th school. Didn't know a soul. And one of the classmates he did a presentation on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Canadian, British, American jumping into Normandy, France. And this battle, this epic historic battle, was ultimately the beginning of the end of World War II. And having been through all these schools, I got picked on a lot. I got bullied a lot. I got beat up a lot. And when I saw that paratrooper and jumping into complete darkness in northern France, I thought, I need to be that guy. If I'm that guy, no one's picking on me. Wow. And no one's picking on anybody else around me. It's one thing to get beat up. It's another thing to watch it happen to someone else and not know what to do. Up until a few years ago, that was my whole driver to join the military, was pick fights with bullies. Without a rabbit hole, turns out the biggest bully in my life was actually my mother. And I was really joining the military ultimately for connection, for family, and to feel safe. And to realize that, because there was a part of my life that I went 22 months of therapy and re-examination and all these things. That's what I discovered. So the ultimate catalyst was I was tired of getting picked on. So the Army was that thing. If I could do that, I will never get beat up again.
And at 11 years old, what an incredible space to be in, where that was the alternative. That was where you could find your strength, your voice. Knowing you now, it's amazing that you would have ever felt like that you didn't have your voice. Not in a bad way, but
I have a voice.
You have a voice. Well, and you know yourself well. You've done the work. You've kind of come to this place where now you and I have known each other for a couple of years already, and really having you have a presence when you walk in a room. So you know what you want from life. Was that something that you knew even at that time when you were making that decision? You're like, I just really know that my life needs to change. This is my trajectory. I'm going to do everything I can to get there. Did you have that awareness at that time?
I did. I did anything and everything that got me one step closer to being in the military, and anything and everything specifically to get me into the infantry, into the airborne as a paratrooper. I avoided certain classes that if I didn't need it, if it wasn't a box on the to-do list to get into the infantry, I didn't do it. I would rather have a spare in my grade, my high school curriculum than take any other class if I couldn't connect the dots between that and the military. So I was really, really, really hyper-focused on getting there. I had no plan B. I didn't have the grades for university, maybe a technical school, but it didn't matter. I had no plan B. I was going to the Army. And in fact, a year after high school, it's like just completing high school, I had a job at the mill, and this was a sweet job. So 18 years old, working in the mill, $21 an hour, union. Like for some people, they've died and gone to heaven. This is like sweet money. I didn't care. You couldn't pay me enough to not join the military. The connection between me and the military and service was so internal and deep. So, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting that you, as somebody so you were personally driven. There was nobody sort of leading you in that direction. You just knew that's where you wanted to go. But you just said you also wanted to join because of the sense of connection you thought you'd have there. Really, this podcast is about connection, but I'm so curious if you didn't have the connection in your current world. You had moved a ton of times. You weren't getting that kind of connection at home. You were bullied and you really didn't want to be picked on. You wanted to put yourself in a position where no one's going to mess with me. What did connection what was that vision of connection for you? If you were to join the military, what would that look like for you?
I thought everyone joined the military for the exact same reason I did.
Okay.
Which is naive and cute. Because once I was in, I realized that a lot of people from Western Canada, unemployment wasn't a big deal in Western Canada. So a lot of people joined the military, not for a job. They joined the military for adventure. People from the Maritimes were joining for a legit job. The military was one of the largest employers in Eastern Canada. The fisheries was busted up. That industry was really disrupted and stuff like that. So these people were joining for a job. I don't know why people from Quebec at that time were joining the military, because there was a lot of separatist talk. But I think in part, they saw Canada as a whole and maybe not as a province. Central Canada, Ontario, it was, maybe it was a place for adventure, for travel, education, because again, the military has a lot of education pathways. I wasn't interested in that per se, like a university education. So I learned quickly that not everybody joined the military to go smash heads with bullies and to huddle up at night and like plan their next day. It was almost a bit of a rude awakening. Like, what do you mean you're not here to pick fights? Like, who are you? Did you read them? Did you get the memo?
Are you serious about this?
Are you for real? You want to be an administrator? What? No, here's your gun. Here's your ammo. Here's your rations. Let's go smack someone. So,
and it wasn't like that.
Not in basic training, because all careers in the enlisted part of the military go through the same basic training together.
I see.
Out of our 110 that joined, about 95 graduated. And in that, 51 of us were going to the PPCLI Infantry Battle School in Wainwright, Alberta. And that's where I found my tribe. That's where I realized, okay, all of us, we're here to kick some arse. One person was definitely, there's a few Maritimers, and it was definitely a job. He was married with 4 kids, and this was a legit job for him, but everybody else, family or no family, we were there. We were looking for the adventure, the travel, pick fights, all that, like very type A, hard. Let's go get dirty. That was a very common thing. And that for me, it was fun. We played in a sandbox every day, with bigger toys and, so yeah, that was a lot of fun for a long time.
So finding that in yourself. So you found people that were like-minded. They were in a similar space as you, maybe different backgrounds than you,
but sure.
Similar space now. So everyone I shouldn't say everyone, but you've got this feeling of camaraderie with the people that are there. You're brand new. I would guess, how long would this have been in training before you got to that point?
So basic training is 10 weeks. Infantry school is 16 weeks. And in that group of guys, we're all average age. I was 19. We had one person who was 27. He was a former chef. Another guy was 24. And he was a very big academic and loved philosophy. And his name's Mike Smith. We're still friends today. And he was a bartender in these nightclubs in Montreal. And he had fights with hockey players, right? Like the Canadians would go into the bar and whatever. So like, very eclectic group of guys, but all of us with this sense of adventure, this sense of what's right, what's wrong. And really, really very quickly bought into a brotherhood, because without each other, without leaning on each other, we weren't going to graduate anything, let alone basic training. We weren't going to graduate any of these things without leaning on each other.
I was just going to say how quickly that must have happened, like where you actually felt the bond, and you just said that. So within weeks, literally
days. For some, yeah, within days, like wow. Within days, fatigue sets in, uncertainty. The military and training weaponizes uncertainty, right? Like we're coming, we will show up. You will wake up early. Oh my God, when am I waking up? So they were really good at creating uncertainty and disorientation. So we had no choice but to rely on each other. Like, yeah, like be like, hey, Lisa, you watch out the crack of the door while we keep waxing the floors. And if someone comes, you whistle, and we all pretend we all go back to bed, right? Like, so we relied on each other very, very quickly, to get away with different things, so that we would be ready for tomorrow's inspection, so they'd be ready for tomorrow's test, so that we'd be ready for whatever it was. We would rely on each other to post watch and different things. So we had to trust early.
Which, it's really interesting. And I didn't think we would go here in this conversation. And it's almost, you'll think it's comical maybe, but when I was growing up, I went to something called boot camp 3 times, and it was in Florida in the swamps. And we lived in tents, and we had one pair of work boots. That was it for the summer. And what you're describing, and I was not out there to kick anyone's arse. It was not about that. But it was up in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. We did an obstacle course every morning. We were soaked all day because we couldn't do our laundry, and we had KP duty and all that stuff. So that was like 2 weeks of that. And then we went on the field somewhere for 5 or 6 weeks. And the bond that we had, and I was saying to somebody in, I don't know, one of my clients, and I was saying how I got very good at burning bridges in my youth because we had this really tight bond for about 2 months. And then and there was no social media, and you can't,
Right.
you might send a letter to somebody that you really liked, but it was just a very intense, you're all trying to manage at the same time, very different than what you went through. This is apples and oranges, but
not really. Psychologically, maybe the risk was slightly different because we have weapons, but psychologically, you're relying on each other to make it through the day. Mm-hmm. That level of intimacy, it's very different than just getting on the city bus, right?
Totally. And we used to actually have to, we would take a bath in a slough basically that had alligators. So they're like, just, don't worry about one eye because he's been around a long time, and he's not going to eat you or anything. And
he swims in circles.
He swims in circles. Exactly. But what's so funny too, because there's the comical part of it too. Like we all had been in boot camp for 2 weeks, and then we're now on an airplane. I was 13. I was never on an airplane before. Yeah. And the stewardess comes down with air freshener going back and forth all over. We must have smelled terrible, but nobody, we couldn't smell ourselves anymore. And I think back and I'm like, there were so many comical moments that you just think, oh, but what an experience. And then we'd come home, or I'd come home to my high school, and nobody would get what I was talking about and why that connection was so important to me. What you experienced and the connection that you were looking for, I'm so curious about. I'm asking everybody that's on this podcast, what does connection mean to you? But I feel like your connection probably that you had there, probably there's different iterations of it depending on who you're with and where you're traveling to. And what did it mean for you back then? Let's maybe start there.
So the difference really between the military and we'll call it civilian life, and then position, say, high-level athletics in the military and police and fire and EMS in between, is the greater the risk, the deeper the connection, because the greater the trust required. This other person is tasked with making sure I'm safe, and I'm tasked with making sure he is safe. And I we live in the world we live in. I say he on purpose because in my time, there was no women in the infantry. We were all men. The greater the risk, the deeper the connection. Like, I trust you with my life. And that was not lost on us. We were drilled and grilled daily from the very beginning. They're called fire team partners. Said in another way, battle buddy is another descriptor. But like this fire team partner, he is my responsibility at all times. And I am his responsibility at all times. That sort of connection and that commitment and the level of intimacy, the discretion, the things that we share with each other. I mean, sooner or later, food and girls and cars are just like superficial. Now we're talking about, what are you afraid of? And, who's on your will? And, I'm 19 years old having that conversation.
So connection probably was like almost life and death for you in a way.
It socially and physically, because
interesting.
Yeah. Because first of all, you have the physical connection in that, okay, here we are, we're 19 years old each, let's just say, and we're both strong and we can look after each other if someone wanted to come get us, so to speak. But the psychological connection, if a person doesn't fit in, then the group will literally kind of shun them away. Like if that person just doesn't fit, they don't think the same as us, or they hesitate on doing certain things that require courage. If there's a sniff of fear in that other person, for our own safety, we will, and it doesn't sound very good, but that person gets pushed out of the group. They're a psychological risk for us. And so that person either gets recoursed, sent to a course that hasn't started yet, let's say, or depending on their own temperament, they might be removed from the military altogether. Because again, I have to trust you implicitly, and trust is a feeling, and it's not just marching in a straight line and getting good scores on the range. It's can I trust you with my deepest fears?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
when you were in the thick of it, do you have an example of when that connection mattered the most? Like, do you have some kind of a memory of something when you were deployed? I don't know where you actually were. Maybe you can tell us where you were and where the early on connection that happened so thoroughly, where that actually made all the difference when you were on the field.
Yeah, there's a number of stories that flood to my brain. So Somalia was my deployment. We deployed on December 19, 1992, and arrived in Somalia 32 hours later in just outside of Mogadishu. So if anyone's seen Black Hawk Down, that's in Mogadishu. And we were just on the outskirts of that. And then we went north of there, which put us on the border of Somalia and Ethiopia for the most part. There was an airfield that we were tasked to protect, and then just the whole area of our operation to provide security for that entire area, largely to defend against drug and weapons cartel, so to speak. We wouldn't use cartel back then, but that's a word we all understand. And so, there's a time when, for example, two people, me and Chris, are on sentry, and sentry is a 3-hour shift. And our job is just to watch out into the abyss of black to make sure that no one's sneaking up into our camp and talking about everything and everything. And then, when it comes time for leave for some R&R, he says, hey, and this guy's been in the airborne 2 years ahead of me. And I'm brand new in the airborne. I'm just a few months in. And he says, hey, when we go on leave, you're going to be my roommate. It wasn't an option. And he goes, you're my roommate. And I'm like, okay. And you don't say no to Chris. And, but I asked why. And he says, because I know you have someone at home and you're not going to cheat on her. And I don't want anybody's negative influences on me either. Because he had a girlfriend at home. Now, same guy, a couple months later, he gets a Dear John letter while we're deployed still in Somalia. Basically says, hey, Chris, I don't love you anymore. Bye. He shared that letter with me. He goes, look what I just got. And I read this letter and my heart sank for him. So a few of us got to read that letter, and we helped him write a letter back. That's the level of closeness and connection. Like, people, we trust each other, not just, with our car, we trust each other with our emotions, with our feelings, with our fears. And
if I could just ask, because it's interesting, the Vince that was hyper focused to get into the military, do everything you can, go bust some heads, whatever that was for you.
Yeah.
And then what you're describing now, where you're sharing your emotions, you're bonding, you're caring about people's lives, and they're caring, I would guess, about you and wanting to take care of you as well. Was that a difficult shift for you, or did you just soak that up where you were just like, I needed it?
I soaked it up. I did. And it was very organic. Like, you can't fake this. There are people that try to fake connection and pretend to be your friend and these different things. And those people can be sniffed out in any part of the world, right? Regardless if you're in the military or not. Mm-hmm. We can smell the taker in the room, according to Adam Grant, the takers, the givers. Mm-hmm. And again, those people get shunned and removed from the organization. But you're right. Like, I absolutely soaked it up. I'm someone who really values all living things, with the exception of ants, chitterbugs, and mosquitoes. Yeah, these I really do value all living things, and so these relationships are very organic. And this other guy, Paul, like Paul and we've been friends ever since. He was one of the first men I met when I was assigned to the Airborne Regiment. Just pre-COVID, he tells me, "Hey, I'm getting married. Going to be down in Canmore in May," and COVID lockdown happened in March. But the first thing I did was go out and I calculated, I've known Paul for 27 years. So I went and bought a 27-year bottle of scotch, and he still has not gotten married, but I'm not buying a different bottle of scotch. There's a statute of limitations because the bottle gets exponentially pricier. And he just might be too afraid to drink it. So yeah. But when he does get married, like this is Paul Powers. He's been a dear friend for so long, and we might only talk a few times a year, but yeah.
So I've known you as a coach, like probably ever since I've known you, you've been a coach. I'm curious about the transition from what that life was for you, where you transitioned into something different. I actually don't know the story of how you became a coach and why you chose that path. I'd love to hear just sort of coming from that. How do you actually transition to something new?
Oh, it's so easy.
The connections are going to be different, right? You're going to be a different person. So you're coming into the world with maybe different expectations, even what you want out of life.
The rudest awakening to me when I left the military, so this is 96, was that relationships outside of the military are not to the same depth as they were in the infantry and in the airborne. And that was, to me, just mind-boggling. Again, I was naive to, well, why wouldn't we be this close? And I was really put off that someone wouldn't want me to be that close to them, or they wouldn't want to be that close to me. And because I really value deep, connected, meaningful relationship, which the infantry, we thrived on that. So getting out of the military, I spent the next 9 years in sales from, first was photocopiers, then it was law enforcement equipment, gym memberships, mascots. So, the Harvey the Hound, like those things. And ultimately I got recruited to be a strength and conditioning coach at Edge School for Athletes. And that's where I found a whole new level of connection that I didn't find in sales. It was the best thing for me to be removed from business, to remove from sales, because within sport, I thought, wow, like this kind of feels like the military. There's some, like, these kids go on the ice or the soccer field or whatever. They play their game and they rely on each other to prepare, to play, to compete, to recover from injury. And I was a part of that as a strength and conditioning coach. And I fell in love with coaching. I fell in love with these athletes. And I thought I'd arrived. This was going to be it. And in 2008, the economy tanked, and my role in the school was released. And so I took that pretty hard because I thought I was contributing so well that why would you dare get rid of me? And I ended up being unemployed for about 15 months. And during that time, my wife just absolutely giving and caring, constantly sending me job opportunities, whether, didn't matter where it was. And I remember I was avoiding all of them. I was like, there's no connection here. There's no, it's just a job, right? No offense for anybody, but I wanted to do more than just pay a mortgage. And I remember saying, I don't want a job, I want a life. And it was just serendipity that I had my resume out there, and a business coaching firm reached out, and ultimately I did business development for the existing coaches. And then after some time, they thought, hey, we think you might make a good coach. So I agreed and took the course. And that was through a company called Action Coach. And I started there. And within a year and 3 months, I left them and went into my own practice in 2012, and I've never looked back. So I've been coaching for 10 years this year, and 9 years in my own practice. So it's been a really, really interesting journey.
From my experience, coaching sometimes can feel like a lonely venture because you're trying to figure out your niche. You're trying to get the client. You're working, even if you're working one on teams or with groups. Where were you finding it? You love the coaching. So when you were moving into coaching, was it in with other coaches, or what, where did you find the connection part of that fed you in that?
When I was at the firm, sounds like a John Grisham novel, right? When I was at the firm, we developed some really tight relationships with the other coaches. And so that connection was there too. And we all, while we're in theory, all competitors, because the client gets to decide who they want to work with, at the same time, we were each other's biggest cheerleader. And so one of the things that I was really curious about is just the relationship between coach and client. And I would often get criticized by some of my questions. Vince, you're a business coach, not a life coach. I said, yeah, I get that. Well, you're asking questions that are more like life coaching. And I said, well, if business is the left hand and life is the right hand, and then they come together and clasp together, how do you remove one from the other? You can talk life and never discuss business, but how do you talk business and never discuss life? Mm-hmm. Relationships at home, the relationship, just life outside of work, that has an impact on how that person shows up to work, how they lead their teams, how they make decisions in their organizations. It didn't matter what I asked. I was still criticized. So that was a big part of why I left. So my clients today, years later, are some of my closest friends. This one client of mine I refer to who has my sister, and she refers to me as her brother. They come over for dinner. We go to their house for dinner. We have dinner November 26th. There's other clients where like we just booked birthday. Like it's my birthday. And they're like, we want to go for your birthday dinner. We're very, and the ability there's this idea that a person can't separate friendship from asking hard questions about the choices they're making. And that's something I think I can do well. I'm familiar with the bias, but at the same time, I can say, okay, my coach hat is on. And maybe this is just correlation, but my client retention with those two examples are 6 and 4 years.
And what you're describing seems the same environment model as the military, in the sense that you're on a mission. You're trying to accomplish something. In the middle of it, you're human. And there's human relationships, and there's decisions to be made. And there's, the Dear John letter to figure out, how do I manage that relationship while still being on the mission? I can imagine you as a coach, you're bringing a lot of that background and experience into the work that you do now.
I have a client, and I've had others who is going through divorce. Been there, personally, and through other experiences, have witnessed divorce. So maybe it's not a coaching session. Maybe it's we go to dinner for 3 hours. Mm-hmm. Let's just get away from everything. Another client the other day, I think of experiences that we can do together that allow them to see life through different lens. I've taken clients to retreats. The other day we went to the gun range, and we spent 3 hours just shooting paper, and I happen to be pretty good at it. So we had a lot of fun together. And I just came up with all these random games for us to play. And we laughed and we giggled, and like
that's a different kind of coaching, right? Like I think a lot of people spend a lot of time, especially with the amount of life coaches and business coaches. And there's so many people out there trying to make their mark on how do they serve their clients. And what you're describing to me, it really does speak to your natural ability to connect. And probably even when you were 11 and making a decision to join the military, maybe you weren't aware of it yet, but you just had this drive to feel that connection. So you're hungry for it, which is amazing.
Just even as you're saying that, I'm looking back, I'm thinking I would always be asking questions like, what do I need to know? And who has the answer? And then just through that, a relationship may or may not to be developed. And having been to so many schools, so I transitioned 10 different times to get out of grade 12, right? I would, to any coach, that is hopefully listening is, I would say, just you do you. Don't try to be this coach or that coach. You just do you, and look at the past, like re-examine your entire past and what is relevant there, because that's that's your library of resources. So for me, my library of resources is deployment, is running, is rugby, divorce, post-traumatic stress. Like I have all these experiences that I can leverage to support my client's journey. It doesn't mean I'm a better coach than the next person, as long as the next person is using their experiences as leverage to help them and their client through their journey. One of my big mistakes early days was trying to be better than another coach. And that's futile. Just be different. Just be you.
We're coming up to Remembrance Day here on November 11th here in Canada.
Yes.
What is it that you have experienced in that journey that you've taken, joining the military, finding that connection with others that were on the mission with you, making this shift, going through sales, all of this, and now having this really successful coaching practice? I'm curious if you were to take lessons that you learned from your time in the military and you could share it with the rest of us from that experience and say, if I could just put this out into the world and this would influence how people connect with each other.
If we understood the impact we want to make in the world, if we understood the human problem we want to solve, and we just did that, in World War I, the Great War, and World War II, another great war, the men and women who signed up, they wanted to make an impact. They wanted to make a difference, whether that was overseas or the role at the factory making bombs here in Canada, or like my wife's grandfather was a mechanic on Lancaster bombers out on East Coast Canada. And he did that job with absolute pride. So so Remembrance Day is a day that we reflect. It's obviously, it's not a day to glorify war. It's a day to reflect on the freedoms we have because of the sacrifices of so many people. I always say that freedom is not free. It was paid for by the blood, commitment, and sacrifice of others before us. And so Remembrance Day is a really meaningful day for me. And one, to be honest, one that I really didn't understand the depth of Remembrance Day until I was long out of the military. It was 2006. I was just getting ready for my day, and the news was on that morning, and they mentioned the people who were killed in Afghanistan. And I knew one of them. Like, he was one of my good friends. I was like, oh, are you for real? Like, Frank is dead? Like this, how's this possible? 2 months later, another one. Some time later, another one. Like, I know 3 guys very, very closely, very, very intimately that never came home from Afghanistan alive, and others who came home injured. And in my entire experience in the military, I know 13 men who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. So when that started happening, I started realizing the significance and the impact of all that. And I started doing things differently, at least with respect to Remembrance Day. It's a bittersweet day. It's sweet because a bunch of us come out of the woodwork that one time a year and meet and have a pint together. But it's a bitter day because we've lost some good friends, and we can sit and joke about some of the funny things that have happened, and that we've witnessed. But this will be the first Remembrance Day I'm not in Canada. I'm going to be in Denver at a conference next week. So Remembrance Day has nothing to do with where we are and everything about what we do in the moment. So
I was just talking to a friend about making relationships personal and when we're making connections, we're handling them with care, that we are showing up for the other people in our lives. And when we make it personal, and having this conversation with you is really special for me. So thank you so much for sharing so much of what you did today. I'm really glad we're having this conversation, and we're going to get this podcast up in time for Remembrance Day. But when we are remembering, that they will hear your words, Vince, because this is important for people to understand the journey to what took you to the military, but also that this is part of you now. It's how you show up.
John Maxwell reminded me, whenever I heard it, but it's like 1 is too small of a number to make an impact. So like one's too small of a number to build a fence, move a piano, climb Everest. One's too small of a number. So one of the things I loved that you said was take care of that relationship. But I don't know if anyone does life well by themselves.
Well, and I love what you said, and maybe that's a great place for us to end. We can't do a lot as one person. We can't move mountains, and we can't change things that need to be changed. We can't impact in a positive way the things that we really want to see impact in. And even for our own lives, I think we need others if we want to change. So we need to embrace what that looks like to be in community and change within community. And that's all sorts of vulnerability, and it puts us in a place sometimes that is uncomfortable. Love the idea of embracing the people that can be in that with us so that we can get better, do better, and really make the impact that we're looking for.
I completely agree. And yeah, I would just echo everything you've already said. I really appreciate you. I really respect the work you do. And this podcast is pretty cool. So it couldn't be done with just one. So
no, that's exactly it. That's right. So, I needed you to have this conversation with me today. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your heart and sharing your story. And I believe so strongly that what you're doing is making that impact, and that as you move out in the world and you're reconnecting and connecting with new people, you are a gift. So thank you so much, Vince, for being here. And we'll be watching for what you're up to next. Where can people find you if they want to connect?
Easy peasy. VinceFowler.ca, because I failed to buy.com fast enough. It was purchased 8 days prior. So VinceFowler.ca. I should embrace my O Canada.
I was going to say.
Google Vince Fowler, and if you live in Calgary and you want to go bust out a 20K trail run and have some snacks along the way, maybe we'll cross paths out there too. So,
well, I'll just put that call out to somebody out there in podcast world, because it won't be me, but we will talk again. I so appreciate the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.